Hello, and thank you so much for joining us for today's TC Alumni Career Development webinar. If you have a chance, we would greatly appreciate if you could please complete this brief form that's showing up on the screen. Our presenters would greatly appreciate it if you can take the time to do that. The presentation will be starting shortly. Thank you so much. Hi, thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. If you just got in, please, before we begin, you could take some time to complete this brief form, and we'll be beginning shortly. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much again for joining us. If you just joined, please take some time to complete the brief form that you can see on your screen. You just need to type in that URL into a web browser, either on your phone or on the computer if you have some time. My name is Elisa Ewan. I'm the Assistant Director of Alumni Relations here at Teachers College, and I would like to thank everyone for joining us today for the Alumni Career Development Webinar Series featuring alumnus Reshan Richards and Stephen Valentine. The webinar series covers a range of career topics and includes speakers from a variety of backgrounds. The series is co-sponsored by the TC Office of Career Education and Professional Development and the Office of Alumni Relations. Videos of past webinars are available on our website at www.tc.edu/alumni/career-webinars. Today, Reshan and Stephen presents The Teaching Secrets of the Best Leaders. Reshan Richards is the Director of Studies at New Canaan Country School and co-founder of Explain Everything, Inc. He also teaches at Teachers College and the Columbia University School of Professional Studies. Stephen Valentine is an educator, school leader, writer, and serial collaborator. He serves as the Assistant Head, Upper School, and Director of Academic Leadership at Montclair Kimberly Academy. He is coordinating editor of Cling Brief and the author of Everything But Teaching. Together, Steve and Reshan have co-authored numerous print and online publications, including 2016's Blending Leadership, 6 Simple Beliefs for Leading Online and Off, and 2019's Make Yourself Clear, How to Use a Teaching Mindset to Listen, Understand, Explain Everything, and Be Understood. Before we begin, I just want to let you know that if you have any issues with the audio, please feel free to chat me directly in the chat box. And without further ado, here's Reshan and Stephen.
Thank you very much, Elisa, and to Teachers College and the Alumni Office for creating this opportunity for us to share and hopefully help people as they think about their own careers and working in and around schools and school leadership. To start, we thought that Steve and I can share a little bit more about ourselves and our relationship with Teachers College. I will leave this link up here just for a little bit longer in case anybody wants to copy it down or manually type it in so that we can have a better sense of who is in the room. But Steve, can you share a little bit about yourself and your work both at Montclair Kimberly Academy as well as your long-serving relationship with Teachers College?
Sure, Reshan. Thank you, and thank you all for being here. So I've been an educator for over 20 years, and I've been an educator at Montclair Kimberly Academy since 2002. But I'm also a writer on the side. It's sort of something that I'm passionate about, and I've been practicing for a long time. And that actually connected me with Teachers College through the Klingenstein Institute, which is, I guess, a smaller concerned branch of Teachers College. And so my primary work there is to run a publication called Cling Brief, which a lot of school leaders and leaders slightly outside or parallel to school, get information. So every month, with the exception of the summer and December, we tend to publish 8 to 10 digests of things that a group of school leaders feel that other leaders or teachers should be reading. So that's really my connection to Teachers College.
Cool. And for myself, I did my doctorate in the Instructional Technology and Media program, my EDD, which falls under the Math, Science, and Technology department several years ago. And for the past 5, maybe 6 years now, I've continued to be an adjunct assistant professor in the MST department, teaching a course called Managing Educational Technology Resources. And then more recently, within the Klingenstein Center, I've also been teaching in their summer master's program, a course called Technology and Leadership. Actually, the course name might be something different than that, but that is the general theme of that experience. And also for the last few years, I've been serving as lecturer at the School of Professional Studies, which is another one of Columbia's graduate schools, and I teach or co-teach courses around organizational strategy and learning. So this is about learning in corporate and business settings, as well as a course on leadership development, and with a focus on how can modern leaders apply the most effective and contemporary practices that are happening in today's classrooms in business leadership settings. So Steve and I have collaborated on a bunch of different things, and we always tend to have this kind of leadership anthropology bent to the way that we both observe our own context, as well as stories that we see in the news, stories from our colleagues, stories from folks all over who are sharing what they're doing and what they're seeing in schools. And we have a couple of operating frames or beliefs that we think are important to share with all of you, to both frame what we're going to share throughout the rest of this webinar experience, but also beyond that, we believe that these operating beliefs are to a degree timeless. So the first one is simple. To be successful, we have to be better teachers. And we're considering teachers and teaching as a interaction between any number of people that doesn't necessarily have to be tied to a school context. So we're always thinking about leadership in the context of teaching, but not necessarily looking at educational institutions as places, the only places where teaching and learning occurs. The second belief is something that we've observed a lot in leadership practices, and especially for those who are stepping into or stepping across to leadership positions within schools. And that is often those folks who aspire to or ascend to those kinds of positions in schools were successful in the classroom. They were successful at leading groups of students towards greater understanding, towards better demonstration of understanding. Yet when working into leadership positions and starting to manage teams or lead teams and committees, that sometimes those practices that made them successful in the classroom aren't necessarily modeled and done in those leadership settings. Instead, people often mimic or copy or appropriate those practices that they themselves experienced in leadership context as a member or somebody who was called into settings. So Steve and I both believe strongly in calling attention back to emerging leaders and those who are stepping into those roles, to go back to those roots, those operating principles that made one successful in the classroom, and especially as it aligns to, let's call them more progressive or contemporary teaching and learning practices that we're looking at, that are certainly being explored and researched and studied and disseminated at institutions like Teachers College. Another thing that we wanted to frame and call attention to is that this medium that we're in right now, which is a webinar, is different from a classroom, and this setting, our engagement with you as an audience, is different, both in this live setting and for those who might watch the recording of this. Steve and I, to a degree, are the presenters. We are the teachers in this setting, but the thing that we don't have that a leader might or a classroom teacher might have is the cadence, the ritual of frequent meeting, of those in-between times, and to a degree, building those relationships over time where you're able to both build upon prior knowledge as well as advance and think ahead to the next time that you might convene in whatever setting that might be, whether it's in person, asynchronous, or some mix of a blended environment. And when I say blended, or when we say blended, we even look at the simple idea of sending an email in advance of a face-to-face meeting. You are now blending modalities in order to serve a purpose of advancing a group of people towards some greater purpose. So what we're going to do, and I'm going to hand it over to Steve in a moment, is we're going to share 3 conditions, and this is the first one, and I'll let Steve explain it better, that we think we can more easily orient around and be able to take away. And these conditions have emerged from our research and our investigations around what leaders are doing that both incorporates certain teaching moves and practices, either intentionally or just by good instinct and habit. So Steve, would you care to please explain this condition and your recent thinking and looks around it?
Sure, thanks, Reshan. I would add one layer to something you said earlier, though, that we do encourage leaders to recall their time in classrooms, with the understanding that not everyone has spent time at the front of a classroom, not everyone has been a teacher, or not everyone has spent all that much time as a teacher. So the other sort of reflective point that you can keep in mind, or the reflective anchor, is the very best teachers that you yourself have had. Because, again, leaving behind those memories when you go into leadership, we think is sort of a waste of experience. And so if you yourself don't feel that you've taught at a very high level or taught that much, you've all been in classrooms. And so you can keep that in mind when you're leading, to think back to those moments in classrooms that really worked for you, so that when you're leading others, you're not simply thinking about outcomes, but you're actually thinking about human development and what makes human development of teams possible. So that's just a little addition to what Reshan said earlier. So transitioning to authenticity, we really have these 3 broad categories that that we created around when we were looking at teaching principles that we thought could transfer to settings outside of classrooms. It was really our project for the last 2 years. We were trying to come up with sort of when in doubt types of moves or conditions, because we know that everybody in leadership is usually drinking from a fire hose, usually moving really quickly. And so we wanted to have these reminders that we felt were durable. And so the first when in doubt is, when in doubt, tend to what is authentic, or tend to authenticity in the room or with the people that you're charged with leading. We define authenticity a little bit differently than some of the academic literature might. We've really boiled it down to making sure that you're helping people to do what people do best, and or making sure that you are kind of overseeing certain situations in a way that only you can oversee it. So it's not as simple as saying, like, humans versus machines, but it's also as simple as saying, make sure that you're helping the people that you're leading know that there's a human in charge of them. And so, Reshan, if you could just sort of advance this one step, I want to actually talk specifically about a couple of very concrete examples of what we mean by this. This is going to be in the notes, so if you read this right now, it's a pretty complicated statement, but it comes from this amazing researcher, Mary Helen Immerdino-Yang, who writes about a lot of different things. She does a lot of serious research. She does research with her students. But one of the things that she said recently that really sort of struck a chord with me is that the mind is not idle when it's resting. So that's sort of a very, very obviously brief paraphrase of the research. But once you've sort of started to understand her research and its impact, one move that it sort of allows you to make and feel good about, which we also feel is authentic, is strategic pauses throughout the day, throughout the leadership day. And so one thing that you could apply from this webinar at the very next meeting that you run is to build some breaks into the meeting, right? And so this cuts against this sort of efficiency mindset that seems to be kind of plaguing leaders all over the world, that you have to be incredibly efficient and you have to, plan your time. I mean, that's important, but if you're focused on the way in which people actually learn and the way in which people actually become future oriented and the way in which people actually make meaning, those are teaching concerns that translate to leadership. And the move is, as I would challenge you to try, is in your next meeting to build in some breaks. These can be breaks where people are asked to synthesize material. These can be breaks where people are allowed to take a walk or to walk with a partner. And the research base underneath it, besides a lot of the things that, that we've referenced in sort of different writing that Reshan and I have done, the really hardcore research that we're citing here would say that this is a great way to help people learn. Also a very authentic way to help people learn. On the next slide is, another, great way to show up in person and to take care of the very human elements of leadership. This is a sketch of a teacher greeting students as they enter a classroom. So the reason that we felt the need to point this out to you today, we feel that it's a very authentic move that either a teacher or a leader who considers herself a teacher can and should make every time they're calling people together. Because if you're studying social emotional learning in schools, which is something that most of the best schools are doing right now, one of the simplest moves to sort of tend to the social and emotional learning in your classroom is to greet students by name as they enter your classroom. So, I would say that it's a small stretch to think about, again, the next meeting that you might be running. Are you kind of arriving right away, like 2 minutes before the meeting starts and just jumping into things? Or are you arriving 6 minutes before the meeting starts and really making sure that every person who comes into that room is greeted, knows that they are known, is kind of warmed up in a way to sort of change gears from whatever it is they were doing before they came into the meeting? These are not things that computers or machines can do. In fact, the way that computers and machines work against your meetings, I would challenge you to just take notes on this in the next 6 months. Most of the meetings that you walk into, I would bet, people come in, they sit down, and they activate a device. They go on, they're immediately typing away in their email, they're checking their phones, and that's because no one's engaging them in person and really starting to activate their particular unique talent and skill, and frankly, their reason for being in the room in the first place. So again, it's a small insight from teaching. Greet them at the door if you really want them to be known and to be present during the meeting.
Thanks, Steve. I think to build upon or restate that core idea that's always resonated with me is really thinking about what might a machine not be able to do today, and frankly, what might we not want it to do in the future, right? You do want people to be able to read all of those additional context, the mood, the setting, all of those other things, and to a degree, that is the responsibility and role of both the teacher and the leader when convening groups of people together. So I'll kick off talking about this second condition, which we have described as immediacy, and there are multitudes of definitions of this term. And for us, we wanted to make the distinction between something being immediate versus something being instant, and we do not necessarily see it the same way. With all of the modes, modalities, tools, and just this collection of choices, humans today have far more choice about when experiences and transactions can occur. And just because something can happen instantly does not necessarily mean that it should. And today's leaders, in our opinions, are constantly reflecting upon their choices about the when that they are, from a position of power, calling people's attention to something. And that's the responsibility, to be aware of those choices and to be quite intentional about those things. So I will shift, let me switch my screen here. I always like to think about the context of leaders who do have some regular cadence with an individual or a group of people, and the modes of that experience. So in the middle, you might have this meeting, and let's just imagine it as a face-to-face meeting. But there's often both steps that happen before, in advance of when everybody has convened, and then there's the things that happen after. And it is absolutely, in our opinion, the responsibility, just like it is for a teacher, to consider this whole progression beyond just that time when everybody is together, because ultimately the best setup and teeing up prior is going to make the time when everybody's together that much more effective and useful. And the follow-up is what's going to help reinforce whatever that experience was in advance of the next time people are convened. This may seem like obvious work and the stuff that might happen both instinctively and with training for those who are in the classroom, but in the busyness of leadership of complex organizations, it's often easy to forget about this complete package, that to a degree, if the good prep and a commitment to the good follow-up isn't made, it almost diminishes the purpose and the potential value of that meeting. Steve and I have shared and written before that leaders have a great responsibility to always think about the time and talents of those whom they call together to serve a purpose. And I think always having that mindset orientation to those things is what will undoubtedly and eventually serve those leadership moves in what we think is the best way. One move that I'll share that I've been using in my own practice, and I've certainly espoused it to others. I learned it from the former CEO of a gigantic company, and something that he, in mentoring me, said would be a good way to build understanding when working with a new team that I was now leading. And that is the simple move of, in advance of whatever convening is happening, to just outline these three things in as clear and concise way as possible for whomever's coming. What is the agenda? What is actually going to happen during the time that you're together? I mean, I guess you want to put date, time, and location too. Those will be helpful bits of information there. So this could be simply, we're going to hear a financial update. We're going to hear, or we're going to discuss some curricular program that's being introduced, and we're going to review the next 2 weeks schedule. So people coming in from whatever experience and part of their busy day, that they have a sense of what to expect. Some people are going to prepare in different ways as far as how they react to that agenda. But by setting it up and then to a degree honoring it once people are convened, you are now helping to prime the whole experience for whatever that was. But this next step is what I found to be the most effective for me personally, and I've been sharing and spreading my kind of positive reactions to this from it, is attached to each of those agenda items. You want to be able to outline a very specific and to a degree measurable, in whatever way you can describe it, intended or desired outcome. So it's not enough to say we're going to have some review of some financial report, but you want to be very clear that an outcome from this gathering, it might be as simple as, we want to acknowledge, the update on the finances. So that is something that you can at least like, well, did everyone in the room, were they able to confirm understanding and acknowledge whatever was being reported? And the answer is going to be yes or no. When you might have a discussion about something, perhaps there is a clear decision, decide upon ... So, and acknowledge, understand, decide, any of those kind of very active action verbs attached to outcomes is going to help people contextualize, well, here's what's going to be here's what's going to be discussed, and here's what's expected to happen. So again, people can prime themselves for not only what's going to be experienced, but what's going to be the outcome. This is very similar to anybody who's looking at instructional design or unit planning, lesson planning. Often you'll start with, well, what are the intended learning goals, or what are my essential questions that I want folks who I'm pulling together to consider? And these types of practices not only will make it clearer for the audience whom you're convening, but I guarantee as a leader, you'll become more reflective and intentional about the types of things that you are pulling people together to do. And then finally, this might seem redundant, especially if it's a frequently recurring meeting, but you never know, there might be folks or people who are called in for special things. Just giving a simple roster of who's expected to be there also will get people ready mentally, because assuming that they know or know of those other people, when they quickly glance through this kind of rundown, they'll have a sense of, well, here's what we're going to do, here's what's expected to be decided, and here are the other people who are going to be there. And this is a framework for being able to try to regularly build understanding. The next layer, though, of this becomes the when. And how do you decide when this goes out? Because if you're like many of the organizations that I've been a part of, there can often be this email overload or messaging overload, or things just get lost in the fold. There's two parts to this, or two ways to try to mitigate and address this. The first one is simply about consistency and predictability, and that just takes time to establish and help your audiences build trust that you will indeed hold to it. So if you've got a regular group that you convene, that if you say, I am going to send out the agenda outcomes and attendees 3 days prior or 5 days prior, I'm going to, people will build in trust and a routine to be like, I know this is something that's ahead, and I can expect it to come to me with enough time for me to at least glance over and consider. Now, deciding what that advanced time is, I think that is something that has to get tweaked and adjusted based on your setting and understanding the people and the communication culture, whether it's email or Slack or in person or a memo that gets put in a mailbox. That depends on the institution, but it's just a matter of holding to it and then being consistent, so people begin to trust that that's a system of how they will be informed and how they can show up with the best preparation. What I found is, because a lot of my communication to teams in sending this, I'm often doing it digitally over email, and the moment when I'm constructing it may be the most convenient for me, but not necessarily the best time for it to arrive in the respective inboxes of my attendees. And my school and other organizations that I'm associated with are all using Google Suite or Google for Business or Google Apps for Education. And one of the nicest little hidden, maybe less hidden features that was introduced and made universal was this idea of the schedule send. And what this allows you to do is construct the thing that you want to send, but then get it off of your to-do list, but also set it to ship at a time that falls into the routine or the framework that you've set up. Other mail clients and programs, I think, have similar types of features, but it's a simple thing that really helps you take control of your immediacy to a degree. You, as the leader, are able to construct and set it for delivery at the time that's best for you, but then you're also able to consider the time that is going to be received by your audience. And here's a place where a tool helps create a new set of choices for you as a leader that you don't always have to do the default. Another question that you might ask, especially as you're constructing these things, is for every item that you're adding, does it actually require people coexisting at the same time? That means meeting either in the same room, or if you're an organization that has a lot of distributed colleagues, do people need to carve out the same chunk of time on their calendar in order for this experience to happen? Oftentimes, leaders feel the need to call people together because it seems to be the most efficient. And honestly, at the front load, when you're establishing relationships, you do want that face time, that in-person contact. But over time, you might find that there's certain things that have to happen in person, and then some things that you might be able to figure out other modalities by which that work can advance. And that, again, is not something that you have to almost build habits and build in expectations of how that work is honored for people to commit. But this is what good leaders do. They build relationships, they're consistent, and they're predictable over time. One other thing that you might find useful in service of immediacy in meetings is to figure out how you can use collaborative spaces, whether it's digitally through things like Google Docs or other shared online spaces, or even physically in the same room, just having giant Post-its and whiteboards. Instead of just having everybody sitting and passively and internally taking notes and documenting their understanding, how can you make the thinking and the processing of others who are convened more visible to other people in the room? And that can be a very powerful way, not only to help keep people engaged and be aware of the things that are top of mind, both for the convener, but also how other people are reacting and prioritizing the things that they're hearing during the course of the meeting. So none of these are necessarily mind-blowing or radical moves, but they're rather intentional and purposeful uses of things that any of us can do at any moment. We just have to build in the time and the habits to do it consistently.
Yeah, so I would just add to this sort of the flip side, which is regardless of which system you're working in, to send information and to receive information, one kind of edge for the leader to consider is that your audience, the people that you're working with, are usually aware of the range of possibilities that you have at your disposal. So Reshan mentioned the scheduled send, right? If I just went through this where I had to send a teacher a fairly negative email because it was basically something that a parent had asked about and that needed to be addressed. And it was a Sunday night. If I would have sent that email Sunday night at 9 o'clock, I would have basically ruined his night. There's just no doubt, because this was something that we needed to sit down and address. So because I could schedule it, I was able to write it and then schedule it for Monday morning at 8 a.m., which is also, not a great time to get that email, but it's better than Sunday night, And so this idea of having a discipline around immediacy, it really does matter for the people that you're serving, and they know you can do it. And so if you're the leader who sends a bunch of emails out on a Saturday, your people over time are going to realize that serves you. It serves your purpose, but it doesn't help them to actually relax and refresh over the weekends. So you could be sending two different messages where you could be saying, hey, everybody have a great weekend. But then if you're not actually scheduling your emails and you're sending them out all weekend, over time, that's going to erode trust. Same thing with if you're sending emails where you could be linking to materials and sources. It's kind of lazy to simply reference something that you could link. Over time, people realize this. Or not sending a calendar invite, or sending a calendar invite that doesn't have all the metadata for the meeting. These are all small things that you can do to actually improve the lives of the people that you serve, that you lead. Ed, in terms of video, do you video important meetings when people can't be there? Yes, it takes time, but in the long run, it shows people that you care about their understanding. So that's just a couple more things you can keep in mind when you're thinking about immediacy.
So speaking of caring, I'm gonna try to launch this poll here, and we'll see if folks who are here, it'd be great to get some responses. So hopefully this has shown up for you. Give it a few more seconds for anyone else who wants to respond. And let me try to do this share. All right, so thank you for this feedback. For some of you, we'll maintain the pace, though we may pick it up a little bit to respect the third of the respondents who shared their thing. So Steve, pick it up, all right?
No
Thank
problem.
you. Thank you for that feedback. Yeah. So let's jump into the next thing based on that.
Okay. So delight is really the last of the when in doubt moves that we've written about and that we suggest. So again, when in doubt, tend to the authenticity, the immediacy, and or the delight. And when you're thinking about creating delight for people that you lead and serve, another way of saying it is, how can I solve a problem in a way that not only solves the problem, but also that adds some kind of extra or lasting value. So in a teaching setting, right, this is the equivalent of, helping students learn to solve certain math problems, but also helping them to understand how they can apply that same problem solving in a part of the world that matters to them. So, for instance, if we had a student who was learning certain statistics in statistics class, and then you helped that student realize, oh, you could also apply these statistics to the work that you're doing with a certain club or community service initiative, or in terms of things you care about. So really, it's kind of the core of inspired and inspiring teaching. Now, the interesting thing, again, as Reshan mentioned earlier, like we're always like looking through the news and looking through, looking at our experiences to see where we can make connections. If you look at the work of some of the most popular sort of organizational thinkers like Seth Godin or Adam Grant, or there's this great female writer that I just discovered. I'm not going to say her name correctly, but it's Hermina Ibrera. They all seem to be writing about, I think they're writing about delight because they're writing about helping people to access internal motivation, to work with purpose, to find meaning in what they're doing, to, rather than managing time, to manage their attention and to pay attention to things that have value to them. So, again, it's a signal for us that we're seeing people who are leading thinkers and writers outside of education who are really kind of cribbing ideas from, again, those teachers who help you not only to feel welcome in a classroom, but to feel so inspired in a classroom that you want to take what you learn and apply it to the world and to bigger problems and bigger solutions. So, again, that's delight. It's sort of the hardest of our terms to define. But I'll give you like one example because, you do have to work at this. You have to work at framing this for people. And so one sort of really, I think an example that's easy to understand because we've all experienced it is, I think as teachers, you intuitively know that active learning is really best for learners, right? And so it is not a good move in a classroom to simply lecture. And again, I think that's pretty accepted among people who know things about teaching. With the rare occasion of the very gifted lecturer, right? We've all had the gifted lecturer, but for the most part, most of us should not just stand up and lecture when we teach. So you're supposed to get students moving, you're supposed to get them doing things, you're supposed to get them on their feet, you're supposed to encourage collaboration. But adults, and I guess, students who are a little bit older on the spectrum, um, we don't love walking into a meeting where active learning is about to happen, right? So there's been interesting studies done that, again, adults and students don't love necessarily taking part in active learning, but at the end of the day, it's best for us as learners. And so just knowing this, just having this, realization or this understanding allows you to actually address that at either the start of a year, at the start of a meeting, at the start of an activity, to just kind of not only engage people in active learning, but to also explain to them why you're doing it and to sort of try to stretch out into the added value. So again, it's the last thing I'll really say about this is, let's say you're giving somebody feedback, right? That could help them to solve a particular problem. That could help them maybe to get out of a situation or to, avoid peril in some way. But if you also help them to understand the importance of continuously collecting feedback, then what you've done there is you haven't just solved their problem in the moment, but you've given them the tool to continue solving their problem and most likely avoid similar problems in the future. So, again, we're encouraging you as leaders to always be thinking like that teacher who wants whatever is learned in the class to transfer outside of the class, because that's when you're making people more autonomous. And that's when you're actually creating people who are not just following you, but who are leaders themselves, because they're going to be able to take the meta lesson and apply it elsewhere and test it elsewhere, and then hopefully come back to you and let you know like how it went.
Thanks, Steve. So as we head into the final part of our webinar here, and we will save some time for any questions that may have been brewing or that come up. These are 10, let's call them moves or thoughts or ways of planning and thinking that you'll often see around contemporary or progressive educational instructional design or looking at cognition and instruction. And Steve and I thought about these things even in the construction of this particular experience. Now, sometimes a little bit subtle, sometimes a little bit one-off, but we did want to try. So I'm gonna try another poll here, and let's see this. So which, if any, of these teaching moves did you notice? We'll give it about 5 more seconds. Okay, say close and share. So, when it comes to each of these things, I'll comment briefly on some of the types of things we tried to do. Choice is tough considering this environment, but to a degree, you had choice about coming in and even being a part of this experience. We couldn't necessarily create multiple paths by which you can experience this, other than you could participate live, or you could have registered and accessed the recording. So there were other ways that this experience could have happened for you. Those who came for the live viewing chose to be here in the moment, while others may have flagged the announcement of the registration for this and said, I choose to engage with this at a different time. The active listening, you may have noticed, at least when Steve was sharing a little bit about delight, I was trying to model using a practice of sketchnoting to show what I was hearing as he was talking. Follow-up will hopefully come following this experience in what you're able to access, not only the content of this webinar, but also access to Steve and myself for any questions that you might have. The backward design piece, we didn't necessarily, well, of course, we had our own goals for what this webinar would achieve, and being realistic that this is to a degree an isolated experience. But the formation and the rationale behind the agenda, outcomes, and attendees is very much oriented in a backwards design framework, maybe not piece by piece, but how do you start from the targeted goals and then consider the experience of attendees coming back from that. And our formative assessment practices, these few polls, those are kind of formative assessment light, but we did try to build those in there. And then, for some of the other ones, I realized, Steve, at some point we said we might have asked folks to stand up and stretch. Hopefully, because of this medium, at any point you would have felt comfortable, if you're watching on your phone or sitting at a computer, that you realize that you could stand up and get a drink. We couldn't virtually provide snacks, but that's something that is often both welcomed and is helpful when people are shifting context to become part of the experiences that you're leading. Steve, any comments on any of the remaining items here?
Well, my favorite one on the list, you've already talked about, which is active listening. I've seen Reshan do this sketch thing a number of times, either at speeches or while I'm talking. And it's a great visual reminder that you really have to work hard to show people that you're listening. And it's, how do you do that verbally? How do you do that with your body language? I think that's the challenge. But as for the rest here, again, brain breaks. We did not pause. We did not have really a strategic pause, although some of the polls were meant to, especially this particular poll was meant to do a little bit to leave the door open for some synthesis and to sort of really have people think back through where we've been. Differentiation, I find it hard to do that when you're not in the same room or working over time because we don't know the learners on the other end of the line here. And as for storytelling, we did a little bit of that. Intentionally, one of the things that I did was, when I was talking about meeting pauses, I could have very easily spoke first about greeting students as they enter a room, but I spoke second about that because I think one of the interesting things to think about with storytelling is to mix up the typical chronology because that sort of allows people to make sense and reorder details, and I think that's good for learning. So just to answer some of our own questions here.
Great. So I think with that, I'll flash our information here, but we did want to be respectful of time and also create the space, a strategic pause for those who would like to ask questions. And I believe they will use the questions module within GoToWebinar. And of course, if there's no questions and people are quietly synthesizing, that is fine too. You have information on the screen here about how to get in touch Both Steve and I are present and to a degree active on Twitter. That's what those handles are for. And our email addresses are below that. And we are certainly happy to field questions or follow up or anything else that you might want to communicate about that this medium won't support just in this particular moment. So let me see. So a question came in about, how if you're somebody who's you are called to these settings, right? You have a boss, you have a leader who doesn't necessarily convene people in the way that a good teacher does. My first question, or the first thing to look at, would be, one, is this person open to feedback and open to change and perspective? And if the answer is no, then I think the first channel that you want to work on is that relationship with that person, so that you get to the point where any kind of suggestions for basically leading people more productively are seen as coming from a good place, rather than kind of a criticism, which can be challenging when there is a strong power dynamic. Another way that you can kind of subtly share certain things is, say, I participated in this professional development or this webinar, I read this book, I saw this article, and when you circulate it, you send it to the whole group that is part of whatever that setting is. And it's not necessarily meant to be a dig at the leader who is convening, but rather a more generative way of saying, this is something that I found interesting. What do other people think? But a lot of times it has to do with culture and personalities, and how do you find ways to navigate and mediate that. And my answer almost always is you have to build that relationship and that trust, so that when somebody is may need to both change not only behavior but even like beliefs around what it means to lead people, that takes time and trust for sure.
Yeah, I would add that you have to teach them, right? And so that starts with trust. But you also, the one thing you can control in that situation is yourself and your own discipline. So I'm thinking about a leader that I've worked with over the past 5 or 6 years, and one thing that I've done to kind of help change the conversation is, if I'm having a meeting with this leader, then I send a calendar invite, right? Instead of doing it in a way that's much slower. If I'm in a meeting with this person, rather than print things out, I'll set up a Google Doc, and then I'll take the time in the meeting to help this person access the Google Doc. So it's part of it is about sort of showing, this is how I work, right? And if we're going to have a meeting, to just sort of keep working the way I work, and then over time, the case is easier to make if it's something that the person has been invited into, on his or her own time, and not exposed, but just sort of brought into something that they can then own and say, this actually speaks to me, or I could see the merit or the value in this. So it takes time, but I think you have to control your own behavior and output, and then the other person will hopefully see some of the value in the moves you're making.
A couple of other questions have come in here, and I want to be mindful of the time. So somebody asks, what happens when people say they receive too many emails or are too busy to read even to read an agenda before convening? So I think in some ways you have to be aware of like institutional habits and what's there, and figure out how do you rise above it. a lot of questions you might want to consider is, well, how big is this group that's convening, and what is their frequency of meeting? Because I think that will impact, when you can help people commit to, like, of all the things they read, well, this one, by reading it, I'm actually going to see that it's valued and has served that time better. I think people establish habits of ignoring or saying I'm too busy or I'm not going to prioritize it, because then when they show up after doing that preparation, they don't feel like that prep time was actually honored or valuable. So you might need to establish those habits with smaller groups or in smaller settings to kind of build up that muscle for how people engage with it. Or you start to ask people and let them help decide, well, what would be the mechanism that will make this time together most useful? Because I imagine if folks are feeling I'm too busy to read an agenda, they're already coming into that meeting that whatever might have been the topic is not necessarily top of mind, and they're just showing up because they're supposed to. So here's where you can figure out, well, what would be the best way to use your time and talents in this meeting? Now, if they say, like, well, to not meet at all, then that becomes a different kind of challenge. But something that might be just worth investigating and addressing. Well, why? What is the purpose of this group and its convening at this particular frequency? And then you start really getting down into more like systemic and institutional types of challenges. But honestly, like, that might be what helps move an organization forward, is to look at those things. So that might not be the great answer, but I would let the people who say they're too busy help to shape what would work, knowing that, like, saying, well, canceling the committee or canceling the team is not a realistic option. Steve, I'll give you this last question here. Someone said, I set an agenda for all meetings, but the team generally goes off script. How might I rectify this? This could be the meeting wizard or fairy might help there, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, you've teed me up here. I mean, sometimes, if there's someone in the room who has a particular skill for managing time and keeping people moving, sometimes I think just naming that person and saying, I'm going to ask, so and so to help me with something that I'm working on, which is to kind of serve our time and talents by keeping our meetings moving. So then you've articulated the goal, and then you've assigned a task, and then you're allowed to be really present. So that's one way. The other way is to sort of sometimes do, there's the notion of the 360-degree feedback for an individual, but there are also ways that you can do kind of an assessment of a group, where the group is giving an assessment on, meetings and quality of meetings and are we serving mission? And then, so that's a way to surface data, because if you're seeing it, other people in the room are seeing it too. And then, I think sometimes you just have to have those one-on-one conversations with, the main offenders, and just let them know that you'd love it if they can help you to solve the problem. The last thing I'd say, though, is I think you also have to recognize that sometimes people are coming to meetings with their own agenda, and that can be okay sometimes, because if people just need to vent or be around other people where they can relax and kind of let their mind drift a little bit, maybe you're scheduling too much. Like, maybe instead of having such a packed agenda, the data is telling you that when people come to that room, they want to go off script because they need to go off script. They need to relax. They need to spend time in an unstructured way with other people. So those are 4 very different answers, and you can do with that what you will.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add right before we close here, when you talked about assigning somebody, giving them that task to be the time manager, just from a power situation, if that person who's trying to has been given permission to interrupt or say, we're going to pause this and move on to the next thing or come back to thing, and if it's not the leader, you're actually helping to not create kind of an awkward tension where somebody feels, well, somebody in power is shutting me down or shutting down a conversation, but it's been assigned to a peer. That also can be helpful. But it is slightly after 6 p.m. So we want to thank everybody who participated here, and we want to thank folks who are going to be listening to this after the fact, and this will be shipped to folks who registered, and I believe accessible in other ways. So Elisa, I'm not sure if you're gonna to take us home here, but Steve and I
Yes.
both say thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, well, thank you to both of you as well. We really do appreciate both of you taking the time to share your expertise with the TC community. A video of this presentation will be available on our website. Again, that URL is www.tc.edu/alumni/career webinars. And as Reshan said, all the registrants will be receiving the video link to this webinar as well. Please feel free to visit our website for more information about our monthly webinars and upcoming events. We hope you can join us for our next webinar called Leveraging Mentoring, Creating Your Path to Success on January 29th with alumna Ruth Gauthier. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful holiday season.